Have you ever felt like a single moment could change everything? Picture a cold morning, mist blanketing the fields, and you completely lost, thrown into an unfamiliar world. A place where the scent of hay mixes with the restless neighing of horses, where every step feels like a test of emotional and physical endurance. And what if the only person who could help you was the one you feared the most? In this video, you'll follow Elisa, a young woman who never imagined she'd have to trade the chaos of city life for the deafening silence of the countryside. You'll discover how the sudden death of her mother threw her into a world where every glance holds a mystery and every silence hides a deep wound. Are you ready to uncover the secrets a cold, distant man keeps buried in his heart? Stay with me until the end, because what begins with tension, fear, and uncertainty may transform into a story of unexpected passion, heartbreak, and resilience. Take a deep breath and get ready. What you're about to see might stir something deep inside you. Hit play and find out why some stories can only be understood once they've been lived. But before we dive into this intense journey, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? I'd love to know how far this story will travel. Now, take a deep breath, because what comes next will give you chills. It was on that freezing winter morning, with fog veiling the fields of Campos to Jordão, that Elisa's life changed forever. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to be thrown headfirst into a world that wasn't hers, where the scent of hay and the cries of restless horses would become her new soundtrack. Elisa was 19, born and raised in the big city, surrounded by the blaring of horns, subway screeches, and crowded coffee shops. Her life had never been easy, but what was coming would be a far greater test. After the sudden death of her mother, she was sent by her aunt to live with a man she had never met, a horse trainer known for being gruff, withdrawn, and, according to local whispers, incapable of smiling. His name? Arthur, a name spoken with a mix of fear and reverence among the ranch workers. Her aunt's old car barely made it up the dirt road before speeding off, leaving nothing but dust and silence behind. Elisa stood there, suitcase in hand, staring at the vastness of that place. A weathered wooden house with peeling paint, fences begging for repair, and in the distance, a stable echoing with the sounds of anxious horses. The cold bit through her coat, but what truly chilled her was the expression on Arthur's face. He appeared on the porch, arms crossed, eyes harder than any she'd ever seen. "So you're the one," he said, voice deep and dry, like every word carried the weight of stone. He didn't offer to help with her bags. Instead, he turned his back and walked inside the house. Elisa took a deep breath, trying to swallow the lump forming in her throat. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet as she stepped into what felt less like a home and more like an emotional prison. The kitchen smelled of strong coffee, but the air inside was thick with tension. That first night, Elisa could barely sleep. The room was small, with a single bed covered by a rough blanket and a window that let in the biting wind. Every creak of the old wooden house made her heart race through the darkness. One question kept echoing in her mind: what am I doing here? The fear of being treated like a burden grew with every second of silence coming from the other side of the house. At dawn, before the sun had even risen, a sharp whistle pierced the air and jolted her awake. Elisa jumped out of bed, stumbling over her own feet. Arthur was already up, boots caked in mud and eyes even colder than the day before. "No one sleeps in here," he said flatly, tossing an iron shovel into her hands. "The stable's waiting." Without the right to protest, she followed him outside, stomach twisted in fear and uncertainty. The smell of horse, hay, and animal sweat hit her like a wall the moment she stepped inside the stable. Arthur, like a battle-hardened general, pointed at the dirty corners, and barked orders. "Clean it right. I don't want to see laziness." Every sentence cut through her pride like a blade. But even with her eyes burning and her arms aching, she refused to cry in front of him. What she didn't know was that this was only the first of many tests yet to come. The days that followed were a relentless series of challenges. Waking up before sunrise, braving the icy morning air, and hauling heavy buckets of water from the well to the stable. That was just the beginning. Every stumble, every tiny mistake was met with Ardor's thunderous voice slicing through the air. "If you can't handle it, ask to leave." He barked whenever she took a second too long to finish a task. But Eliza, despite her exhausted body and blistered hands, bit her lip and kept going, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her quit. One afternoon, while stacking hay bales, Eliza lost her balance and fell flat on her back, sending a cloud of dust into the air. For a moment, she braced herself for another scolding, but when she opened her eyes, she saw Ardor standing at the barn's entrance, silently watching her. No help, no words. Just that unreadable stare that left her even more unsettled. His silence was worse than any shout. It was as if he was studying her, measuring how much she could take before breaking. That same evening, as she washed his mud-caked boots outside the house, Eliza heard a strange sound coming from the pasture. One of the horses was restless, neighing loudly and stomping the ground like it had seen a ghost. Before she could react, Ardor came running, eyes filled with tension like she'd never seen before. Without hesitation, he leapt over the fence and sprinted toward the animal, showing, for the first time, a human side. Worried, almost desperate, Eliza stood back, watching in surprise at the sudden shift in his demeanor. She saw Ardor stroke the horse's neck with a gentleness she never thought possible from someone like him. There was a connection there, a story she didn't yet know. That scene etched itself into her mind for hours as she tried to sleep. For the first time, she wondered what had happened in his life to make him so cold, so unreachable. And in that moment, curiosity began to bloom inside her like a seed breaking through the soil. The next morning, over breakfast, Eliza finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been stuck in her throat. "Have you always worked with horses?" Ardor paused for a moment, eyes fixed on his coffee cup, as if weighing whether to answer or ignore her completely. "Always," he said curtly, then stood up and walked away without looking back. Still, that single word felt like a crack in the stone wall he had built around himself. As the days passed, small signs of change began to show. Ardor was still blunt, but the yelling had become less frequent. Sometimes he'd just grunt, cross his arms, and watch her from a distance. Elisa, on the other hand, was catching on fast. She learned how to handle reins, clean hooves, and even read the horses' moods by the way they flicked their ears. Slowly, she was earning everyone's respect, everyone except him. Or so she thought. It was on a cloudy afternoon, with a cold wind howling through the trees, that the unexpected happened. While trying to saddle a horse for the first time, Eliza lost control. The horse panicked and took off across the pasture, dragging her down the dirt trail. Her scream echoed across the ranch. Ardor, who had been far off, dropped everything and ran like his life depended on it. Elisa's heart was pounding, and in that terrifying moment, before everything went black, one thought raced through her mind. Will he save me? The fall was brutal. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, and for a few seconds, the world went silent. The trees spun above her, the cloudy sky blurred, and the taste of earth filled her mouth. When she opened her eyes, she saw Ardor storming toward her, face paler than she'd ever seen. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling slightly as he checked to see if she was conscious. For the first time, his voice sounded different, no shouting, no scolding, just a hushed whisper. "Can you hear me?" His eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, every layer of his cold exterior seemed to crumble. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms, holding her with a strength and care Eliza never imagined possible from that man. The walk back to the house was silent, but inside him, his heart pounded in panic, as if he just realized how much she already meant to him. When he laid her gently on the couch, Arthur stepped back, ran his hands over his sweaty face, and stood there breathing heavily, like he was trying to collect himself from a scare that had shaken him to his core. For the next few hours, Arthur didn't leave her side. He made a cold compress, went to the village pharmacy for ointment, and clumsily tended to her bruises and scrapes. Elisa, sore and aching, couldn't take her eyes off him. There was something different in every gesture, as if the fear of losing her had finally shattered his wall of indifference. And as he rubbed ointment into her scraped hands, she felt, for the first time, his touch soften, almost tender. That night, the silence between them took on a new meaning. It wasn't the silence of disdain anymore. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions, with words that would eventually need to be said. Sitting at the edge of the couch, hugging her knees to her chest, Elisa watched Arthur slouched in the armchair, staring into the fireplace as if searching for answers in the flames. She wanted to ask so many things about his past, about the fears he kept buried, about that sudden wave of concern he had shown her. But the courage still hadn't come. The days that followed brought a transformation no one at the ranch could ignore. Arthur still had his rough edges, but every now and then, Elisa would catch him watching her from afar with a look that was almost protective. If she was carrying something too heavy, he'd quietly step in to help, without saying a word. If she got hurt, he was there, his eyes betraying a flicker of concern. Slowly, it was as if each act of care was replacing the harsh tone he once used. But despite the shift, Arthur still clung to his feelings, hiding behind short phrases and stiff gestures. One cold morning, as Eliza fed the horses, Arthur finally approached her with a decisive look in his eyes. Without any preamble, he said, "After lunch today, you'll learn to ride." The surprise hit so hard, she almost dropped the feed bucket. "Seriously?" she asked, eyes wide with excitement. Arthur just nodded, turned, and walked toward the barn. But the faint smile she caught forming at the corner of his lips, it stayed with her as one of her greatest victories since arriving. Elisa's heart pounded as she adjusted the saddle, her hands still trembling with nerves. It was the moment she had waited for, but fear lingered too, like a shadow over her shoulder. When Arthur stepped closer to help her mount the horse, the feel of his hands at her waist was firm, but different from anything she had felt before. For a split second, their eyes met, and in that wordless gaze, something unspoken passed between them. Their story wasn't just about horses and hard labor anymore. Something bigger, something stronger, was starting to grow, and neither of them knew where it would lead. Elisa's first trot was clumsy, almost comical, but with every try, she found a bit more balance. Arthur walked alongside the horse, hands firm on the reins, eyes scanning her every move. At each slip-up, he offered sharp warnings. Hold tight. Don't let fear take over. But behind the curt words was a quiet care, a steady presence that made Eliza feel, for the first time, truly protected. The cold wind whipped her face, her hair flew wild, and through all the stumbles and nervous laughter, she began to discover a strength she never knew she had. After an hour of training, Arthur brought the horse to a stop, gripping the reins a bit tighter. For the first time, he looked Eliza in the eyes with a softer gaze. "You learn fast," he said, almost like a compliment. Elisa's eyes widened in surprise. Coming from him, it felt like a medal. A smile escaped her lips without warning. "Thanks. Guess I've got a good teacher." For a brief moment, the silence between them felt light, almost comfortable. But as always, Arthur quickly returned to his rigid stance, adjusting his hat and averting his gaze. Don't get used to it. You've got more tomorrow. That evening, while washing her hands at the kitchen sink, Elisa overheard a conversation between Arthur and the cook, Donna Lucia. The always cheerful, nosy woman teased him playfully. Looks like you're turning into a real human. I even saw you smiling today. As expected, Arthur snapped back with a dry retort. Careful, Donna Lucia. You might be seeing things. But his voice didn't carry the same weight it used to. There was a hint of humor there, a lightness, and Eliza realized that something inside that man's heart had already begun to soften. The days that followed only confirmed what everyone had started to suspect. During chores, Arthur remained strict, but now sprinkled in subtle signs of care. He'd leave a bottle of water nearby, appear out of nowhere when she struggled with something heavy, or point out shortcuts across the fields to avoid steeper paths. Elisa, in turn, couldn't resist teasing him with a sly smile. You looking out for me now, huh? He would only grumble in response, but his eyes said everything. It was a silent battle between longing and the fear of feeling. It was during a thunderstorm, with lightning tearing across the sky and rain hammering the farmhouse roof, that everything spun out of control. One of the horses had broken loose, galloping wildly through the pasture. Arthur dashed out into the mud, shouting commands, and without thinking, Eliza ran after him. The risk was huge, but she couldn't just stand by and watch him face it alone. In the middle of the field, the two of them ended up falling together into the wet earth, struggling to contain the animal. Their eyes met at the exact moment the downpour hit hard, drenching them, breathless, and closer than they had ever been. Not knowing how to react, Arthur pulled her toward him, shielding her with his own body as the horse finally began to calm down. The silence that followed was unlike any that had come before. It was heavy, filled with unspoken emotions stuck in their throats. Their breathing was ragged, faces so close Elisa could feel the warmth of his skin, even in the cold rain. For a moment, she thought he'd pull away like always, but instead, Arthur held her gaze, and for the first time, he didn't look away. On the walk back to the house, soaked to the bone, neither of them said a word, but every step felt like a silent scream of everything that was about to happen. Elisa's heart raced. She knew now. The man who had hidden behind sharp words and stone-cold habits was beginning to melt. And this time, there was no hiding it. That night, the sound of the storm still echoed through the house as Eliza tried to sleep, but her body refused to rest, as if something big was on the verge of unfolding. Each lightning strike lit up her room for brief seconds, casting shadows on the wooden ceiling and highlighting the raindrops sliding down the window pane. On the other side of the house, Arthur paced the living room, restless, hands on his hips, eyes lost in the void. It was as if he were battling himself, torn between giving in to what he felt and continuing to hide behind that hardened mask. Unable to bear the tension any longer, Elisa got up, grabbed a blanket, and stepped out onto the porch. The scent of wet earth filled her lungs, and despite the cold wind, she chose to sit their knees, pulled to her chest, watching the rain fall. It wasn't long before she heard the heavy steps of Arthur approaching. He said nothing, just stopped beside her, crossed his arms, and stared out into the horizon. For a long time, they sat in silence, listening to the rain, as if that alone could speak the words neither dared to say. Elisa took a risk and broke the silence. Why do you always push people away? Her voice was a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. Arthur took a deep breath, ran a hand through his damp hair, and took a while to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, Because it's easier. Losing someone hurts more than being alone. His words left Elisa speechless. It was the first time he had let something so honest slip through, and it made her heart pound, as if she just heard a secret buried for years. Arthur kept his eyes on the rain, but his clenched fists betrayed the storm brewing inside him. Elisa, her voice trembling, dared to go further. Sometimes we don't lose, sometimes we win. The silence that followed was so heavy, she thought he'd just get up and walk back inside, locking himself away again. But to her surprise, Arthur simply sighed, sat down beside her on the porch floor, and pulled the blanket over both of them like someone silently admitting he was tired of running. Even with the blanket between them, the touch of their shoulders was enough to send chills across Elisa's skin. For several long minutes, neither of them dared to move. They just breathed together, sharing the same space, the same cold, the same tension-filled silence. Arthur kept his eyes fixed on the ground, but Elisa could see him biting his lower lip, like someone trying to hold back something ready to explode. And then, out of nowhere, he broke the silence with a sentence she never expected to hear. "If I hurt you, forgive me." Elisa's heart nearly leapt from her chest. She turned toward him, stunned by the man who, for the first time, revealed the cracks in what once seemed like an impenetrable wall. Before she could say anything, Arthur abruptly stood up, as if instantly regretting every word, and walked into the house without looking back. Elisa stayed there, wrapped in the blanket, breath racing, head spinning, and one undeniable certainty pounding in her chest. Something big was about to happen between them. And this time, not even he could stop it. The next morning, the air around the farm felt different. The sun rose shyly, but with a warmth that contrasted with the chill of the previous days. Elisa woke earlier than usual, her body still aching, from the sleepless night and from Arthur's unexpected confession. As she made coffee in the kitchen, every sound of footsteps made her glance toward the door, hoping to see him walk in. But Arthur had vanished, leaving behind only his hat on. The table, as if to say this escape wasn't physical. It was emotional. When she stepped out into the yard, Elisa spotted his favorite horse already saddled, tied near the fence. Her heart skipped. Had he left? Was he running from her and from everything he was feeling? Without thinking, she followed. The trail of footprints in the damp earth up to the highest point of the ranch, a natural lookout with a sweeping view of the land. And there he was, Arthur, sitting on a rock, staring out at the horizon with distant eyes and hands resting on his knees, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. Elisa approached slowly, each step silent, until she was just a few feet away. The wind tangled her hair, and for a moment she almost turned back. But she took a deep breath and softly called his name. Arthur. His name came out heavy with meaning, as if she were calling back not just the man, but the essence. He'd spent so long hiding. He didn't answer right away. He just sighed deeply, closed his eyes for a moment, and said, "I try. I swear I try. But I don't know how to be different." His words cut deep into her chest. Elisa stepped closer, knelt beside him, and, without asking, took his hands into hers. For the first time, he didn't pull away. His eyes were glassy, and Elisa realized she was face to face with a man whose soul carried more scars than she could ever imagine. "You don't have to know how. You just have to want to try," she said firmly, though her voice wavered with the lump in her throat. The silence that followed was thick, almost touchable, as if time itself had frozen for that moment. Arthur finally turned to face her. The look that had once been stone was now human, broken, but honest. "What if I hurt you?" he repeated, as if that was still his greatest fear. Elisa gave a faint smile, even as tears welled in her eyes. "You already hurt me when you pushed me away." So whatever comes after that, I can handle. Her answer caught him off guard. For a second, Arthur didn't move, as if he were absorbing every word, testing the edges of his own courage. Then, in a sudden gesture, almost like a reflex he couldn't control, Arthur pulled her into a tight, intense, desperate hug. His chest rose and fell like every breath was an unspoken apology. Elisa embraced him back, closing her eyes and letting herself sink into that blend of warmth, sweat, and the scent of earth that clung to him. There was no kiss. Not yet, but the hug held everything words still couldn't say. A silent promise that from now on, nothing would be the same. When they finally pulled apart, Arthur ran his hands over his face, discreetly wiping away the tears that refused to stay hidden. "Go back to the house," he said, his voice hoarse, barely recognizable. "Today, I'm going to teach you how to rope." Elisa smiled, knowing that simple invitation carried the weight of a new beginning. The walk back was quiet, but this time it was a light silence. The kind that comes just before a new chapter begins, one they were about to write together, with no turning back. That afternoon, the sky over Campos du Jordão seemed to signal a change of season. The breeze carried the smell of wet soil mixed with the soft fragrance of wildflowers blooming around the ranch. Elisa, heart pounding in her chest, made her way toward the corral, where Arthur was already waiting, rope in hand. His stance was still rigid, his step steady, his expression closed off. But something in his eyes had changed. The wall between them had already begun to crumble. She knew this roping lesson would be far more than just a simple training session. Arthur took a deep breath before explaining the movements. He grabbed the rope, spun it with perfect technique, and tossed it cleanly around a makeshift post, just to show how it was done. Elisa, eyes wide, tried to absorb every detail, every word, but nerves made her palms slick with sweat. When it was her turn, he stepped behind her, gently positioning her hands, and for the first time, the closeness between them was unavoidable. His touch was firm, but careful. The scent of his leather jacket, mixed with sweat and the earth's perfume, stirred something inside her she couldn't suppress. The rope slipped from her hands on the first try, and again on the second. On the third, she closed her eyes tight, trying to ignore how her whole body seemed to react just to his presence. "Open your eyes, Eliza. Trust yourself," Arthur said, his voice lower now, almost encouraging. That simple sentence struck her like a shot to the heart. When she finally tossed the rope in the right direction, the loop landed around the post. With a dry snap, for a moment, they locked eyes. And in that look, there was pride. And there was something more. The lesson ended, but the tension between them only grew stronger. As she packed up the gear, Arthur stood at a distance, leaning against the fence, arms crossed, gaze lost in thought. Donna Lucio walked by with a basket of vegetables and couldn't help herself. "How long you gonna stare like that, St. Arthur?" she teased. He answered only with a faint smirk, one of those rare, nearly invisible smiles, before turning and heading back to the house. But deep down, he knew his internal battle was almost over. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. His words echoed in her mind, mingled with the memory of his hands wrapped around hers. Restless, she slipped out of the house barefoot, following the dirt path to the lookout where they'd spoken days before. She sat there, hugging her knees, gazing at the stars like they might somehow offer answers to the storm she felt inside. And that's when she heard footsteps behind her, unexpected, approaching slowly. Arthur appeared holding his hat in his hands, with the most vulnerable look Eliza had ever seen. He sat beside her without saying a word, staying silent for a few long minutes. Then, in a sudden burst of honesty, he spoke in a low, husky voice. "It's been a long time since I felt this, and to be honest, it scares me." Elisa looked at him, her eyes glistening, heart racing, and without a second thought, she replied, "I'm scared too, but we can feel it together." His eyes searched hers, and for a moment, the whole world around them seemed to vanish. A distant thunderclap broke the silence, warning of another storm on its way. Arthur stood up, held out his hand, and gave her a half-smile. "Come on. Before we get soaked again." But this time, when Eliza took his hand, she knew it wasn't just an invitation to escape the rain. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a new way of being close. The two of them walked back to the house side by side, steps in sync, as if their hearts had finally found the same rhythm. The following days brought a lightness Eliza had never felt in that place. The work was still tough, the cold mornings still bit at her skin, and the smell of damp earth lingered in every corner of the ranch. But something in the air had changed. Arthur, though still keeping his serious posture, now spoke in phrases that sounded more like advice than commands. "If you want to care for a horse, you have to understand its rhythm. Each one has its own pace," he told her one afternoon, as they brushed one of the more skittish animals. Elisa listened to every word like it was a hidden confession, secret code only she could understand, and it was during one of those tension-filled silences, while the two worked side by side, that Donna Lucia appeared in the barn with a knowing smirk and an unexpected message. "Oh, Eliza, Miguelito's here." Her voice hit like a bomb. Miguelito was Arthur's nephew, a young man the same age as Eliza, who came to stay at the ranch every year during school break. When he appeared in the doorway, all easy smiles and playful eyes, Elisa felt the ground shift slightly beneath her. Arthur, on the other hand, stiffened, his expression darkening instantly, like a storm of jealousy had swept through him. Miguelito was the exact opposite of his uncle. Outgoing, talkative, full of energy and charm. On his very first day, he was already chatting with Eliza, cracking jokes and praising everything she'd learned on the ranch. With every compliment Miguelito gave her, Arthur's gaze grew darker. He watched from a distance, arms crossed, jaw clenched, but said nothing. His silence was a muffled scream, and Eliza, though still unsure of what exactly was happening, felt like something inside him was close to snapping. The next afternoon, while Miguelito was showing her how to ride faster and gallop through the open fields, Arthur suddenly appeared, his voice sharper than she had ever heard it. "That's enough. We're done for today," he said, striding over with heavy steps and a stare that pierced straight through his nephew. Miguelito simply shrugged and walked off laughing, as if unaware of the thick tension in the air. Elisa stood frozen, heart pounding, staring at Arthur, trying to understand the storm brewing in his eyes. That night, dinner was a symphony of silence. Donna Lucia, sensing the awkwardness, tried to spark conversation, but Arthur answered only with grunts. Miguelito, of course, kept cracking jokes, trying to ease the tension, but with each new laugh, Elisa noticed Arthur's expression growing. Darker. She could barely eat, the knot in her throat tightening with every passing second. It felt like the whole house was filled with unsaid words, like everyone was holding their breath, until Arthur, in a sudden burst of frustration, slammed his silverware on the table and stormed out to the yard without saying a word or looking back. Driven by an impulse she couldn't explain, Eliza followed him. She found Arthur leaning against the fence, staring at the star-filled sky with teary eyes and heavy breaths. "Why are you like this?" she asked, her voice low but steady. He took a few seconds before answering. "Because I don't know how to share," he said, with a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And seeing him near you, it makes me feel something I can't even explain." His words hit her chest like a punch of raw emotion. Elisa's heart felt like it was going to explode. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and stepped closer, just inches from him. "Then stop running from me," she said, locking eyes with his. Ardor stood frozen for a few seconds, as if fighting every fiber of his being. Until, in a swift motion, he pulled her into a kiss, one filled with rage, longing, and desperate relief. It was a heated kiss, intense, loaded with everything they'd both been holding back for weeks. In that moment, beneath the dark country sky, with the scent of wet earth and the distant sound of horses, everything changed forever. The kiss didn't last long, but it was powerful enough to leave them breathless. As they pulled apart, Eliza still felt his taste on her lips, and her heart pounding so loud it echoed in her ears. Ardor, eyes dazed and breathing hard, brought his hands to his face like he had just broken a rule. "This should never have happened," he muttered, turning his back and walking away quickly. Elisa stood there, frozen, her fingers trembling, with a strange mix of joy and fear burning in her chest. It felt like she'd won something, and lost everything all at once. The following days became a tug of war between distance and desire. Ardor began avoiding her, obviously. He wouldn't meet her eyes, didn't give her direct instructions, and when they crossed paths in the hallway or the corral, he mumbled short phrases like it was enough to keep his emotional shield intact. Miguelito, on the other hand, stayed. Exactly the same loud, playful, always trying to grab Elisa's attention. And the more Miguelito approached, the more Ardor pulled away. But the tension between them only grew. It happened one morning, while Eliza was cleaning the stalls, that everything shifted again. A horse, startled by distant thunder, broke loose and bolted straight for the open gate. Without thinking, Eliza dropped everything and ran after it. But in her rush, she slipped in the mud and struck her head hard against a wooden post. The impact was sharp. The world spun, and the cold ground was the last thing she felt before everything went black. When she came to, she was lying in the living room with a damp cloth on her forehead and Ardor kneeling beside her, his eyes red, hands trembling. "Stay with me, please," he repeated like a prayer, terrified she wouldn't wake up. When her eyes finally fluttered open, he let out a deep, guttural sigh of relief, like it carried years of pain. "You can't leave me now," he whispered, forehead pressed to her hand, each word a silent confession of all he never dared to say. Elisa tried to smile, but the pain in her head reduced her to a whisper. Still, Ardor understood everything through her eyes. He stood up, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and took a deep breath as if preparing for the hardest decision of his life. "We need to talk, but not now. You need to rest," he said, gently pulling the blanket over her with a tenderness he had never shown before. Elisa closed her eyes again, but just before falling asleep, she felt his lips touch her forehead soft as an unspoken apology. That night, while the whole ranch slept, Ardor sat on the porch, staring at the sky and mentally replaying everything that had happened since the day she arrived. His defenses had fallen one by one, and there was no pretending anymore. The fear of feeling, the fear of losing, the fear of loving. All of it now seemed small compared to the possibility that he could have lost her forever that morning. He knew he couldn't keep running, and from that moment on, he had to face his ghosts or risk losing the only person who had ever truly reached his heart. Dawn brought an orange sky and a cold wind that sliced across the face like a blade. Elisa woke with her head throbbing, but the first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was Ardor, sitting in a chair next to her makeshift bed, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked like he'd spent the entire night there, sleepless, like a guard dog, watching over the most precious thing he had. When he noticed she was awake, he took a deep breath, rubbed his face with both hands, and stood up, his expression a mix of relief and unease. Without waiting, Arthur began to speak, his voice still hoarse, as if the words had been stuck in his throat for days. "Eliza, I'm not good at this. I never have been." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth across the room before continuing. "Since the day you got here, I've been fighting this, fighting what I feel, fighting the urge to get close, to protect you, to want you near me." The words tumbled out, as if he were afraid that if he stopped, he'd lose the courage to go on. Elisa watched him in silence, heart pounding, eyes brimming with tears. Every sentence he spoke felt like both a punch and a hug. She wanted to say something, but she let him speak, let him unload everything he'd been carrying. "I've been a coward. I thought pushing you away would keep me from getting hurt again," he confessed, now locking eyes with hers. "But yesterday, when I saw you fall, I thought I'd lost you. And that's when I realized what I fear the most, is losing you for real." The tears Eliza had been holding back slipped down her cheeks in silence. Without thinking, she reached out, and for the first time, she was the one who pulled Arthur close. The hug was urgent, tight, full of everything they'd been avoiding for so long. Arthur held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair like he needed it just to stay standing. "You're not going to lose me, Arthur. Just stop running from me. Stop running from us." Her words came out soft but full of truth. When they pulled apart, they stared at each other for a long time, as if trying to memorize every detail of one another's face. Arthur, still holding her cheeks in his hands, smiled in a way she'd never seen before. A smile full of relief and surrender. "I promise, from today on, I'm staying." Before she could reply, he kissed her again, but this time the kiss was slow, tender, full of care and meaning. No more rage, no more guilt. Just the certainty that they had truly found each other at last. As they kissed, Donna Lucia peeked in from the kitchen doorway, hands on her hips and a mischievous grin on her face, the kind of smile that said she'd known the ending all along. "Finally, St. Arthur. Finally," she whispered under her breath, before heading back inside, leaving the two of them right there, lost in each other. As the sun rose slowly, bathing the ranch in golden light that seemed to announce a new beginning, the sound of horses in the distance, the scent of damp earth, and the warmth of Arthur's hands on Elisa's face marked the start of a chapter that, this time, neither of them planned to interrupt. The next morning, the sound of hooves in the fiefs corral carried a different rhythm, livelier, almost as if the animals themselves were celebrating the change between Arthur and Eliza. The routine carried on. Hard work, dust, sweat, but now there were glances that said more than words ever could. Arthur, still holding on to his quiet nature, began revealing tiny gestures that once seemed impossible. A glass of water left silently by her side, a correction spoken more gently, a faint smile when she mastered something difficult. And Eliza, in turn, carried a sparkle in her eyes, as if every day on that ranch was another chapter in a story she never wanted to end. That evening, as they were organizing the tack inside the barn, Miguelito appeared holding a letter, his face a mix of surprise and anticipation. "This came for you, Eliza. Looks important," he said, handing her a yellowed envelope with her name written in small, neat letters. Elisa opened it with trembling hands, and as she read the contents, her face changed instantly. It was a job offer from a riding school in a nearby town, something she never imagined receiving. Her heart raced. It was a chance to start a new chapter, but it also meant leaving this place. And him. Arthur, noticing the shift in her expression, snatched the letter from her hands. He read every line in silence, his eyes growing harder with each word. When he finished, he simply took a deep breath, handed the letter back to her, and said in a low, controlled voice, "If that's what you want, I won't stop you." Elisa's chest tightened. This was the moment she had feared the moment. He'd rebuild his walls and let her walk away. But this time, she wasn't going to play that game. That night, after hours of trying to make up her mind, Eliza made a decision. She walked to Arthur's room, stood at the door with her heart in her throat, and called his name with a firmness that even surprised herself. He opened the door, his eyes tired, hair disheveled, like he hadn't slept either. "I'm not leaving," she said, before he could utter a word, "because I've already found my place. And it's here, with you." For a moment, the silence was absolute, like even the wind had stopped just to hear her say it. Arthur blinked a few times, as if trying to process what she had just said. Then, slowly and deliberately, he stepped forward, cupped her face in both hands, and spoke with a deep, raw sincerity she'd never heard from him before. "Then stay. But if you stay, know this: I'm never letting you go again." The kiss that followed was unlike any before. It wasn't just desire or relief. It was a blend of promise, surrender, and a brand new beginning. The next morning, Elisa opened her eyes to sunlight pouring through the window and the sound of steady footsteps approaching. Arthur appeared in the doorway, wearing a soft smile and holding 2 cups of coffee. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said in that dry, teasing tone that only he could pull off. Elisa laughed, sat up in bed, and motioned for him to sit beside her. And there, between sips of coffee and quiet glances, they both understood, without needing to say a word, that what they had started between the fences of that ranch was going to last far beyond the cold mornings of Campos du Jordão. "And now I want to hear from you. Yes, you who stayed with us all the way to the end. What would you have done in Elisa's place? Would you have stayed? Or would you have gone? Tell me down in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you know what to do. Hit that red button and turn on the bell, because the stories around here are just getting started." And so, between a clear blue morning and the smell of fresh coffee filling every corner of the house, life on the ranch took on a new rhythm. The days rolled on, and the hard routine that once felt like punishment for Eliza now felt almost like a gift. She still woke up early, but now with a smile on her face, knowing that before the sun even rose, she'd hear a gruff morning from the porch, followed by a knowing glance from Arthur. And he, still firm and deep-voiced as ever, now carried a lighter look in his eyes, as if he had finally found a real reason to wake up every day. Miguelito, always quick to notice the changes, kept teasing the two of them with playful jabs. "Feels like a soap opera, huh, Uncle?" Who would have thought the king of grumpy stares would turn into Prince Charming? He'd laugh, hauling buckets of water. Ana Lucia didn't hold back either. "Told you so." That man just needed a good dose of affection and a stubborn girl who wouldn't give up. The kitchen echoed with laughter, and even though Arthur would grumble and roll his eyes, everyone knew. Deep down, he was enjoying the emotional mess. And like every good story that starts with stumbles and ends with reconnections, the ranch became a stage for small daily surprises. One lazy afternoon, Arthur showed up with an unexpected gift. Brand new saddle, custom made just for Eliza. The leather still smelled fresh, and her name was subtly engraved on the side. "For whenever you feel like riding, but this time with safety," he said, handing it over with a quiet smile that to her meant more than 1,000 love declarations. Elisa couldn't hold back her tears. She threw her arms around him, ignoring his initial stiffness, and in that moment, she knew this was all the confirmation she needed. They would still face challenges, storms, tough work, and of course, Arthur's old habits trying to creep back in now and then. But now, She knew she could count on him, and he on her. His fear of losing had finally been outmatched by her courage to stay. Later that evening, as they walked side by side through the pasture, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Arthur suddenly stopped. He turned to Eliza, took a deep breath, and in a voice steadier and softer than she'd ever heard from him, said, "You know that place I always said was just mine, the one by the lake." "Where? I've never taken anyone?" She nodded, curious. "Well, tomorrow, I want to take you there, because from now on, what's mine is yours too." Her smile was instant. Her heart raced, and before she could stop herself, she wrapped him in a tight hug, overcome with a happiness so full it felt like it might burst. They stood there in the middle of the field, under the golden glow of dusk, and without needing another word, they both understood this was only the beginning. A beginning that hadn't come easy, one that had cost tears, falls, and long silences, but that now was real, because deep down, even the hardest hearts always know exactly where to return once they found the right place.